Hello, everybody. This is Justin Perez for the Air Raid Saturdays College Football YouTube channel, and welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be continuing our predictions for every single team heading into the 2023 season. As you know, you should be accustomed by now that I'm doing these videos per conference just because of the fact that I'm under a time crunch because, the college football season is just right around the corner. So today we're doing the Big 12 conference. I covered the ACC and the Big 10 in previous videos. If you want to go check that out, I'll have the card in the upper right-hand corner for the playlist, and I'll also put it at the end of this video if possible. So today we're doing the Big 12 conference today. I'm just going to get right into it. There's no division, so I'll just do these teams based on alphabetical order. So the first team we're going to be taking a look at is the BYU Cougars. Now, BYU is head coached by Kalani Sitake. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right because I don't watch too much BYU, but I'm sure it's close. But anyway, Sitake, he's at his 8th year at BYU, and he has a 56-34 record. Last season, BYU was an independent, and they went 8-5, and they won the New Mexico Bowl against SMU. This is their first season in the Big 12 conference. They're one of the 4 brand new schools that have come into this conference for this season, and this is their first time playing a college football season in a conference since 2010 when they were in the Mountain West Conference. Their non-conference slate should produce 2 wins against teams that are from the FCS or just transitioning to the FBS. They have a tough conference slate, with Oklahoma, TCU, and Texas all on the schedule. This season should be a decent season because BYU has enough pieces to get back to a bowl game, but as far as competing in the Big 12, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be, a rough year, but they should be competitive in a lot of their games this season. And my realistic expectations are for them to accomplish up to the 9-win mark. So I have them getting 6 to 9 wins as my realistic expectation because there are several winnable games here that they could win if they get the bounces. If you look at their schedule, they have games against Arkansas, Kansas, TCU, and even Oklahoma State. Now, to start the season, I have them going 2-0. I have them beating Sam Houston, who is in their first year in the FBS. I believe they're in Conference USA. That should be an easy win for BYU. And then I have them beating Southern Utah easily on September the 9th. Then I have them going on a 2-game losing streak. I see them losing on the road to both Arkansas and Kansas over the next 2 weeks. Definitely those are 2 games that could be winnable for BYU, especially that Kansas game on September the 23rd. Kansas, they had a great year last season for their standards, and we're going to talk about them in a little while later on, but it is possible that BYU could win that game. Kansas playing in Lawrence is not one of the toughest places to play in college football, so it is feasible for BYU to go in there and get a win and possibly get up to 7 wins. And it's also possible for them to beat Arkansas as well. I know that a lot of people are not going to put that on the table because of the fact that BYU is, mostly a smaller school than Arkansas, and obviously Arkansas plays in the SEC. But I really believe that BYU can win that game, but I have them losing those 2. But then I see them getting a win in their first, or not in their first, but their second Big 12 conference game. This one against Cincinnati, who's also one of the 4 new schools coming in, and we'll get to them shortly. That game's on a Friday. It's at home. Obviously, for people who don't know BYU, Provo, Utah is one of the toughest places to play in all college football. They have, BYU, they have one of the best home field advantages in the nation. So I really believe that, the crowds at BYU are just going to be extra elevated because they're in the Big 12 conference. And, there's going to be a lot of buzz and excitement going around this program. So I believe that the crowd will play a factor in, a lot of their home games. And this is going to be the case here. So I see them getting a win versus Cincinnati to head into the bye week at 3-2. Then I see them losing to TCU coming out of the bye week to drop to 3-3. And they'll be alternating wins and losses over the next few weeks. So they lose to TCU on October the 14th. Then I see them beating Texas Tech again, once again at home. And then they got to go on the road to Texas, who's supposed to have a bounce-back year. Or not a bounce-back year, but an improvement on last season. And I see them losing that game. So I see them at 500 through the first 8 weeks of the season. Then I see them get into bowl eligibility with wins over West Virginia on the road and at home against Iowa State over the next 2 weeks to get to 6-4. West Virginia, they're supposed to be one of the bottom teams in the Big 12 this season. No one's really high on them. I'm not high on them at all. And I think that BYU is gonna at least sneak in a few conference wins. It's not gonna be total embarrassment for them this season and for pretty much almost all the new schools. So I see them squeaking out 4 wins in conference play, but then unfortunately they got to play Oklahoma and Oklahoma State at the end of the season. Now that game against Oklahoma is at home. Oklahoma we will get to later on, but obviously they're coming off a really disappointing campaign where they lost a lot of close games and they got a lot of bad breaks, but they should have a bounce back year and they should get right back into Big 12 conference contention this season. And then they got to play Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma State, obviously they won 11 games I believe last year, and obviously they're a good football team. Well, no, they didn't win 11 games, they won 6 games, but they had a really solid season a couple years ago. Mike Gundy, obviously since he's there, Oklahoma State's going to be a respectable team in the Big 12, and they're projected to have an improvement over last season. And I see Oklahoma State beating BYU the last week of the season. So I see BYU finishing with the 6-6 record and 4-5 in the Big 12. All right, coming up next now, we have Baylor. Now, the Baylor Bears, it's kind of funny because, a couple days ago, I read an article previewing Baylor's 2023 season, and there was a little bit of a joke thrown in there about how Baylor is the Brett Saberhagen of college football. For those who don't know, Brett Saberhagen was a pitcher for the Kansas City Royals, I believe, in Major League Baseball, and I believe he's in the Hall of Fame. But the reason why they made that comparison was because of the fact that Baylor, just like Brett Saberhagen, is awful during odd years, but whenever the calendar hits an even year, then they always do pretty well. Obviously, 2023 is not an even year, but I see Baylor having a pretty good season this year in 2023. They're head coached by Dave Aranda. He's had his 4th year at Baylor. He's had some mixed results. He has a 20-16 record at Baylor during his tenure there. Last season, Baylor finished with a record of 6 wins and 7 losses. They were 4-5 in the Big 12, and they lost the Armed Forces Bowl to Air Force, which really, a team of Baylor's caliber, of any Power 5 conference team, they should not be losing to, one of the military academy teams. I know they're difficult to prepare for, but, if you're a program like Baylor that's had a lot of success there, then, there's no reason for you to lose that bowl game. But they did. And they finished 6-7 last season. Now looking ahead to this season, Baylor, they got a lot of promise with a lot of their players on their roster, and people are saying that there's enough pieces in place where Baylor can get back to their winning ways and be a successful program again. And I really believe in that. Now, when looking at their schedule, they have 2 games in non-conference play that they should win, and those are 2 of the first 3 games of the season. They have a tough non-conference tilt at home against Utah, because Utah just went to the Rose Bowl back-to-back years, and they won the Pac-12 last season. But, Baylor should be in position to win that game. And, good for them how they only have 4 road games this season, so 8 of their 12 games are at home, and they have no Oklahoma on the schedule, which is awesome, or no Oklahoma State, as a matter of fact. So they have some tough competition. They obviously got to play Kansas State, TCU. Iowa State's supposed to be somewhat of a dangerous team this year. Texas Tech's supposed to be a dangerous team. They got to play Texas. And they got to play, I believe, 3 of the newcomers to the conference. Yeah, they have to play UCF, Houston, and Cincinnati. So, they're going to get some tough competition, but, with this roster, you can expect them to get 7 to 10 wins. And the reason why it's possible for them to get to 10 wins is because, like I said, there's no Oklahoma and Oklahoma State on the schedule. They got to play Texas, but that's really the only game That's extremely. I mean, not to disrespect Kansas State or TCU, but Texas and Oklahoma, they've been the class of this conference for a while, and they should get back to being themselves this season again, and they should be in the running for the Big 12 Conference Championship. I mean, this is their last season in the conference, so they might as well just be in the running as well. And Oklahoma should be back to where they were, and Texas should be back to where they were. So, but they don't have to play those teams, so they could get up to 10 wins, in my opinion. Now, I see them starting off with 4 wins. So I see them beating Texas State, which should be no problem. Then I see them beating Utah. I believe they could beat Utah. Utah's not unbeatable. They're a good program, but they're not a team that, is extremely more talented than Baylor. So I can see them beating Utah in that game. Then they got to play Long Island University from the FCS. That should be an easy win. Then I see them pulling off a big win against Texas. I really believe that Baylor's going to pull off a win against one of these 3 teams. Either if it's against TCU, Kansas State, or Texas, they're going to pull off one of those games. And I think that they're going to beat Texas. It's at home. The crowd's going to be into it, no matter if they're 2-1 or 3-0. And I really believe that Baylor's going to take it to Texas. It's going to be a close game, but Baylor's going to be competitive. They're at home, and I see them win that game. Then I see them losing on the road against UCF. They're going to have a couple hiccups somewhere along the schedule, and I think UCF, they're going to be motivated to be hosting that game, and they'll, lose that one. But then before the bye week, I see them beating Texas Tech to get to 5-1 before the bye week, and then I see them winning 3 straight to get to 8-1 at Cincinnati. Then the next 2 games at home versus Iowa State and versus Houston. I think Baylor's way more talented than both Iowa State and Houston. Obviously, I mean Iowa State, they could do some damage this year in the Big 12. They could, get some sneaky wins this season. It's possible, but I don't see that happening against Baylor. And same thing with Houston. Houston, they could do some damage, but out of the 4 new teams that are coming into this conference, they are the least prepared for this transition, in my opinion. So I see, Baylor beating Houston pretty good. And then they lose the next 2 games at Kansas State and at TCU. I just think they're going to lose both those games. It's possible they could win win one of those games, but I don't see them winning any of those games. And then they will beat West Virginia during the last week of the season to finish the year at 9-3. And 6-3 in the Big 12. Again, look for Baylor to be really dangerous this season. They could be in the running for a conference championship game spot if everything goes right and if they just play the way they're supposed to play, and if they're supposed to beat the opponents that they're supposed to beat, as well as sneak in some wins, some upset wins against some higher competition in the conference. Now transitioning over to the second of the 4 new schools, and that's the Cincinnati Bearcats. Now Cincinnati, they have a brand new head coach in Scott Satterfield, who I believe is coming over from Louisville. They were head coached by Luke Fickell last year, but Luke Fickell's obviously at Wisconsin, which we previously discussed in the Big Ten video. So Scott Satterfield, he's coming in. Obviously, a change in the coaching staff means a change in, philosophies and systems. And I expect, Cincinnati to have a little bit of a rough year, but it is possible that they could get a really good year this year. A lot of people are saying that Cincinnati is going to be one of the bottom teams in the conference this season. I mean, that is possible, but along with UCF, I really believe that Cincinnati is more prepared to handle this transition than, BYU and Houston. So this is their first season in the Big 12, obviously. Last season under Luke Fickell, they went 9-4. They went 6-2 in the American Athletic Conference, and then they lost the Fenway Bowl to Louisville. The non-conference schedule should produce 2 wins. They got to play an FCS team and a MAC team, that being Miami of Ohio. And, Cincinnati is usually beating Miami of Ohio a lot in recent years, so, that should be the case there. Miami's supposed to be a really good team this year in the MAC. But, we'll see what happens with them. But, I think Cincinnati will win that game. They have a tough conference schedule because they have dates with Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Baylor, and BYU. And 2 of those 4 games are on the road but it's not like they can beat any of those teams, especially when it comes to Oklahoma State, Baylor, and BYU. It's possible that they could beat all three of those teams. Realistic expectations, though, I see this team at least getting to 7 wins. Maybe I should lower the expectations to 6 or 5 wins, but I'm really high on Cincinnati doing really well in their first year in their new conference. So that's why I gave them a minimum of 7 wins and then a max of 9. Because as you see here, there's a lot of winnable games on the schedule for Cincinnati. It's not like they're going to come into this league and totally be outclassed by everyone else. They have a chance to be really successful this season, and I really believe in them. Now, to start the season, their FCS opponent is Eastern Kentucky. That should be an easy win for Cincinnati. I'm not even going to go over that. That should be an easy win for Cincinnati. Then they got to go on the road and play Pittsburgh, and obviously Pittsburgh, we went over them in the ACC video, and any team that's coached by Pat Narduzzi, they're going to have a stifling defense, and I believe Cincinnati will struggle to Pittsburgh on the road, and they'll lose that game, but they'll win against Miami of Ohio, which is the MAC team that I mentioned on their schedule. So they're going to beat them to go to 2-1. And then I see them losing their first 2 Big 12 conference games versus Oklahoma and at BYU. Like I said, BYU is an extremely tough place to play, and it might be difficult for Cincinnati to get used to that. However, they have that game against Oklahoma the week before the BYU game, but I don't think, I think Oklahoma is going to win games handily. Especially against a lot of the new opponents that they got to face, the 4 teams that are coming in. So they could win that game handily. I could see Cincinnati being competitive in that game, but by the end, Oklahoma should be, blowing the doors off of them. So I see them starting off 2-3 before the bye. But then this is where it gets good. Then I see them getting back to 500 with the win against Iowa State on October the 14th. Then I see them losing to Baylor at home. I just think, they're going to have, they're going to lose some of these games. So they'll lose to Baylor at home on October the 21st. But then I see them pulling off 5 consecutive victories to end the season and finish the year at 8-4. I see them beating Oklahoma State on the road. I see them beating UCF. Houston they should beat. West Virginia it's possible they could beat. And Kansas is possible that they could beat as well. They could lose some of these games, but I have a feeling that they're going to win some of these games. And I see Cincinnati finishing at 8-4. They lost Ben Bryant to Northwestern this season, who was a solid quarterback for Cincinnati when he was there, but I honestly believe that they'll be just fine in this season. So expect Cincinnati to be dangerous, and expect them to make some noise in the Big 12 this season. Now, heading over to the third of the new teams that are in the Big 12, we're just blowing through them here, and we don't talk about the fourth team that's brand new to the conference until much later. But here's the third brand new team. It's the Houston Cougars. They're head coached by Dana Holgorsen, who's in his 5th year at Houston. He's done a decent job with the Cougars. He has a 27-20 record last season in the American Athletic Conference. Houston went 8-5 overall and 5-3 in the conference, and they won the Independence Bowl against Louisiana Lafayette. Like I said, this is their first season in the Big 12. They have a decent non-conference slate that should produce up to 3 wins, But they have a lot of conference opponents that seem better than Houston on paper. Realistic expectations for Houston, I'm saying for them to get to 4 to 6 wins. It's possible that they could squeak out a few of these conference games and get to bowl eligibility. But again, it's going to be really tough for them. Like I said earlier, I think that Houston, out of the 4 brand new teams coming into this conference, they're probably the team that's least prepared for the transition, and I believe that they're going to suffer a lot of setbacks during the season. I see them starting off the season with 2 wins against in-state rivals UTSA and Rice. Now, the UTS game could be considered an upset because the UTSA had a phenomenal year last year. I think they won Conference USA, and they're, one of the more underrated teams in college football, and they're going to be really good this season too. But I see them pulling out that win at home, and then against Rice, who's one of the worst teams in college football. That's on the road, but I'm not worried about Houston not being able to win that game. Then they got to play TCU at home, even though I think the TCU game is a winnable game. And I don't expect them to have the season that they had last year where they made the national championship game. I see them losing that game. That's more of a 50-50 game. That can go either way, but I see TCU pulling that one out. Then I see them beating Sam Houston before they lose to Texas Tech. and they head into the bye week at 3-2. So things are looking good for them so far. But then I see them going on a 6-game losing streak to put them out of bowl contention. They have a Thursday game at home against West Virginia. Even though I think that Houston could be better than West Virginia on paper in some people's eyes, I believe that West Virginia will be able to squeak out some wins during conference play, and as a result, I had to give them a win somewhere, and that's most likely to happen against Houston on Thursday, October 12th. I see them losing to Texas and Kansas State handily, as well as Baylor. I don't think they're going to really be close in any of those games. And then I see them losing tough ones to Cincinnati and Oklahoma State to drop them to 3-8 before they, get a win on the road, a conference win on the road against UCF. I have a feeling that Houston is gonna pull off at least a conference win. They could possibly squeak in a couple of more conference victories, but I'm just not very high on them this season. I don't think they're gonna do very well just transitioning over to the Big 12 conference, and as a result, I don't see them doing very good this season. I see the Houston Cougars finishing 4-8 and 1-8 in the Big 12. They have some nice players, but like I said, I don't think they're as strong as the other teams on their schedule. Now transitioning to another team that I believe might have some struggles this season, and that's the Iowa State Cyclones. They're head coached by Matt Campbell, and Campbell has done a really good job at being able to give stability to an Iowa State program that was really one of the biggest doormats in all of college football for decades. He's heading into his 8th year at Iowa State. He has a 46-42 record. Last season was really tough. They went 4-8 and 1-8 in the Big 12. They have 2 really tough non-conference opponents against Iowa and against Ohio. That Ohio game, obviously Ohio is a team from the MAC, but they're supposed to be one of the better teams in the MAC this season. They're supposed to be contending for a division, an East Division title in the Mid-American Conference, so that could be a tough game, and it's on the road. Even though I don't think it's going to be that feasible for Iowa State to not go in there and struggle. I think that they could win that game. As you see, I have them beating them in the season, but we'll see how that goes. But 2 tough non-conference games, and then they got to play Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Baylor, Cincinnati, and TCU. So things are not really looking good for them on the schedule. They got to play a lot of tough opponents this season, including, 3 of the top teams in this conference, that being Kansas State, Oklahoma, and Baylor, and possibly even Oklahoma State as well. Realistic expectations, like I said, it's possible for Iowa State to make a bowl game. As you can see, I think the most wins they could get is 7 this season, and 5 being the minimum. We'll see how that goes, but overall, I don't see Iowa State being that successful this season. I believe it's going to be a rocky one, as they have a lot of new players coming in. The transfer portal has stepped up and they've added some pieces, but I don't know if the team as a whole is going to be good enough to make it to a bowl game. Now, to start the season, I see them beating Northern Iowa pretty easily on September the 2nd. Then they lose the Cy-Hawk rivalry game to Iowa at home on September the 9th. I believe that Iowa is a way better football team than their in-state rival, and as a result, Iowa State's going to lose. Then, like I said, they have that road game against Ohio from the MAC, but I think they're going to win that one. It's going to be a tough game. I see Ohio. I see the Bobcats of Ohio hanging in with that team, with Iowa State, but I believe Iowa State will pull off that win. And then I see them losing the next 2 versus Oklahoma State and at Oklahoma. I just don't see a place where Iowa State can upset any of those teams. So they'll drop to 2-3, and then they get a win against TCU, to get to 3-3. I think they're going to pull off some wins, some upset conference wins, and TCU is a team that Iowa State could beat. We'll see how that goes. They have a new quarterback and everything, so we'll see how that goes. So I see them getting a win versus TCU, the games at home. Then I see them losing to Cincinnati before the bye week to drop to 3-4. Then they drop to 3-5 with the loss against Baylor before they get to 4-5 with the win over Kansas. That's a winnable game. And then, they drop to 4-6 at BYU. They'll beat Texas. I believe they're going to upset somebody that's a highly favored team in this, on their schedule. And I think that they could beat Texas. And it's possible that they could beat Kansas State. It's a long shot for them to beat, Texas, Kansas State, and Oklahoma all in the same year. But I feel like they're going to beat at least one of those teams. and as a result, I'm picking Texas to be the recipient of that. So they'll drop. So they'll improve to 5-6 for a do-or-die game, last game of the season at Kansas State in Manhattan, Kansas, with a chance to clinch bowl eligibility. But I feel like they're gonna lose that game to drop to 5-7 and finish 3-6 in the Big 12. Like I said, it's possible that Iowa State could have a better year than what I'm predicting them to have. They have some nice pieces, including quarterback Hunter Decker, but I don't know if they're good. I don't know if they have enough talent to overcome the tough schedule that they have this season. Next, we're going to transition over to the Kansas Jayhawks. Now, this is a team that I'm really high on. Kansas obviously has been one of the biggest punching bags in college football for almost their entire existence. They had a really good run in 2007 and 2008, which was actually their last winning season. But ever since then, it's just been a miserable time at Kansas for football. But under Lance Leipold, the Jayhawks have turned things around. Lance Leipold is heading into his third year. He has a record of 8 wins and 17 losses. But last season was when things really started perking up for the Kansas Jayhawks. They went 6-7. They finished 3-6 in the Big 12. They went to a bowl game for the first time in forever, and they lost in a 55-53 overtime shootout against Arkansas. They had some injuries. I believe that I really truly believe that if Kansas would have stayed healthy the entire year, that they probably would have been playing in a New Year's Six bowl game, because that offense was just absolutely dynamite. And they're going to be phenomenal this year, too. They're led by preseason Big 12 Conference Player of the Year and quarterback Jalen Daniels. And he's probably my favorite quarterback in all of college football. He's so fun to watch. He's dynamic. He can run. He can throw. He has a strong arm. He's very versatile. And he can make tons of throws. I saw Kansas play a lot last season. And I'm telling everybody in the Big 12 to watch out. Seriously, just watch out, because this Kansas team is going to absolutely put up some points on the board. They have a good non-conference slate, but they have a decently tough game against Illinois. And Illinois is supposed to be one of the better teams in the Big Ten this season. They have a tough collection of games on their schedule, but all of these games are winnable. They don't play Oklahoma. I see them putting up a fight against Texas possibly, and I see them being in really tight games against Oklahoma and Kansas State. Like I said, the offense is going to put up points. It's just a matter if the defense can improve. The defense had some moments last year, but they need to improve if they want to get better. Reasonable expectations. I believe that Kansas can get from anywhere from 6 to 9 wins. I believe they're going to go bowling again. There's a huge chance they're going to go bowling. I really believe that with their dynamic offensive threats, that there's a 99.9% chance, in my opinion, that Kansas could go to the bowl season. Now, I see them starting off 4-0. They have a couple Friday games to start the season. Both of them are at home against Missouri State and Illinois. I see them beating Missouri State easily. And then Illinois, that's going to be a tough contest. I will be watching that game that Friday. That's going to be a really underrated game in week 2. And that could be, a pivotal game for both of these teams this season. But I see Kansas getting the dub at home to start 2-0, and they go on the road against Nevada. That should be a win, so 3-0. And then they have BYU at home. If this game was in Provo, I would say maybe Kansas would lose this game. But since Kansas is at home, I believe they're going to win to start the season off 4-0. Then they dropped to 4-1 with the loss to Texas. Like I said, that game probably could be really competitive, more competitive than people think. But they'll lose that one. Then they'll beat UCF, and then they'll lose to Oklahoma State to be 5-2 heading into the bye week. So a really favorable position here for Kansas heading into the bye week. They're 5-2. They're a win away from bowl eligibility. And believe it or not, I really see Kansas pulling off a huge upset win at home against Oklahoma to be bowl eligible on October the 28th. I know people are going to say that I'm crazy for having such a thought like that, but, Kansas, they're not going to be the pushovers in the Big 12 this season like they've been in previous seasons. They have a really good team this season, and I have a strong feeling that they're going to pull off an upset against one of these teams, and I believe that Oklahoma will be the recipient of that. So they'll be 6-2, but then I see them losing 3 of their last 4 games to finish the season at 7-5. It's possible they could beat Iowa State. It's possible they could beat Cincinnati. I don't know if they'll do really, really good against Kansas State, but then again, I picked them to beat Oklahoma and have a tough fight against Texas, so you never know. So it's possible they could win some more games, especially against Iowa State and Cincinnati, and maybe even the Oklahoma State game. But I see them finishing 7-5 and 4-5 in the Big 12. Pretty good season for Kansas. Their first winning season since 2008 would be clinched. And I see them going to a bowl game for the first time in many or not for the first time in many years, because they went to a bowl game last season, but heading into the bowl season with the winning record for sure. Now we have to deal with Kansas's big time rival, the Kansas State Wildcats. They're head coached by Chris Kleiman, and he's at his 5th year, and he's done a decent job at Kansas State. Obviously, no one's gonna do what Bill Snyder did at Kansas State, but he's made a name for himself. He went 10-4 last season, went 7-2 in the Big 12. He upset TCU in the Big 12 championship game, but he ended up losing the Sugar Bowl to Alabama. But it was a pretty good season for Kansas State. They shocked a lot of people with that upset win against TCU in the conference title game. They have a lot of players that are not going to be returning, obviously. Adrian Martinez is one of them. But Kansas State is still going to be really competitive this season. They have decently tough games in non-conference play against Troy and Missouri, because Troy is a phenomenal football team from the Sun Belt Conference. And Missouri, they're looking on the way up in the SEC, and they could pose a challenge for Kansas State. But the good news is that they have no Oklahoma on the schedule, but they have to face Kansas, Oklahoma State, Texas, and Baylor. My reasonable expectation meter for them, at least they can get to 8 wins and then 10 wins max, in my opinion. I believe this is a really talented team that's not going anywhere. I see them starting off 4-0. They'll beat Southeast Missouri State. They'll beat Troy at home. I believe they'll beat Missouri on the road in a tightly contested contest, and then they'll beat UCF at home to be 4-0 before the bye week. Then after the bye week, I see them losing a couple tough games. Both of these games are on the road. One is on a short week. They got to play at Oklahoma State on a Friday. I think they'll lose that game. Then I think they'll get upset on the road against Texas Tech. Texas Tech is going to be a sneaky good team in the Big 12 Conference this year, and they could do some damage to a lot of teams' Big 12 Conference title game hopes. And I believe they will do that to Kansas State. But I see them picking up wins over their next 2 weeks against TCU and Houston to become bowl eligible. They'll lose the next 2 games, in my opinion, at Texas and versus Baylor, to drop to 6-4. But then I see them finishing out the season strong, as I see them beating Kansas on the road and Iowa State at home to finish the year at 8-4 and 5-4 in the Big 12. There are some concerns with a lot of the players that are lost and that are being replaced, but I still think that Kansas State has enough talent to be considered one of the better teams in the Big 12 Conference, and as a result, I see them finishing with an 8-win season. Now it's time to talk about the team that everybody's talking about in the Big 12 this season, and that's the Oklahoma Sooners. They're head coached by Brent Venables, who's in his 2nd year at Oklahoma, taking over for Lincoln Riley last season. And Oklahoma really struggled last year. They went 6-7. They lost their Cheez-It Bowl game to Florida State, and then they finished the year at 3-6 in the Big 12 Conference. Oklahoma is one of those programs that you just do not expect to have this bad of a season, but they did. For Oklahoma standards, 6-7 is an absolute disgrace. And personally, I'd agree with Oklahoma fans if they were extremely frustrated over last season. They lost a lot of close games. They had some injuries. They had some bad breaks that really derailed their season, which was, why they finished 6-7. But this year they return a lot of talent, as they always do. They have an easy slate of non-conference games, which really should be the base for 3 expected wins, and they have a manageable slate of Big 12 games. Obviously they got to play Texas, and that's a neutral site game in Dallas, but since Dallas is in Texas, I see the Longhorns having a little bit of a home field advantage in that game. I think a reasonable expectation is for them to get to 10 wins at the very minimum, and it's possible that they could go undefeated this season, just because they got to play a lot of, of the newcomers in the conference. They got to play Cincinnati and UCF and BYU, and they have a really easy slate of non-conference games. And Oklahoma State's a winnable game, TCU is a winnable game, West Virginia's a winnable game. So it's possible they could go undefeated, but I see them having a couple hiccups on the schedule. So I see them starting off 5-0. They'll easily beat Arkansas State, SMU, and Tulsa. For some reason, Tulsa scheduled that game in their stadium, which is funny. But yeah, I see Oklahoma beating Tulsa easily on the road. Then I see them doing the same thing to Cincinnati, and then I see them beating Iowa State easily to get to 5-0 before they got to play Texas in Dallas in the neutral site game. That's going to be played at the Dallas Cowboys Stadium. And I believe that Texas will beat Oklahoma in the regular season matchup. I just think that Texas is a little bit of a better team this season than Oklahoma. But that game could go either way. That's more of a 50-50 game than anything. But I think, Oklahoma Texas coming off the year that they had last season where they built up a lot of momentum. I believe that they will beat Oklahoma in that game. But they'll be good at 5-1 before the bye week. Then they'll go to 6-1 with the win against UCF. That game's at home, so they should win that one. Then they'll lose to Kansas. Like I said, I believe that Kansas will pull off that upset. But then I see them getting 4 straight wins to end the season at 10-2 and 7-2 in the Big 12. I see them reaching the Big 12 championship game. This could be a phenomenal final year for Oklahoma before they move to the SEC next season. So expect Oklahoma to get back to their winning ways and end their Big 12 conference tenure on a high note. Next, we'll take a look at Oklahoma's biggest rival, or one. I don't think it's their biggest rival, but it's Oklahoma State's biggest rival. We're gonna be taking a look at the Oklahoma State Cowboys now. They're head coached by Mike Gundy. Last year was a difficult season. They finished 7-6, 4-5 in the Big 12, and they lost the Guaranteed Rate Bowl to an equally mediocre Wisconsin team. But he's in his 19th year, Mike Gundy, as Oklahoma State head coach, and he's obviously built a phenomenal resume there at Oklahoma State. He's by far the greatest head coach in Oklahoma State history. He's built the record of 156 wins and 75 losses at his time there. He has a favorable non-conference slate. There's a tough amount of conference games on their schedule, but I don't think it's something that they can't overcome. I think that they could get back to a really great year, and I think they could get up to from 8 to 11 wins this season. There's a lot of games that are winnable on their schedule. They got to play, they got to play all of the new teams that are in the Big 12 this season, that being Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, and BYU. And then they got to play West Virginia on the road. I see them having a couple hiccups throughout the schedule. I see them losing several games, but again, it's not like this. It's not like it's gonna be like last year, where they barely made it to bowl season. They're gonna make it to bowl season pretty convincingly this time, and I see them having a better year than what I predict them to finish with. I see them finishing 8-4, and the way they'll do that is they'll win their first 4 games of the season. They have to play Central Arkansas, Arizona State, and South Alabama. Their toughest non-conference game is on the road at Arizona State, and Arizona State's not even that good. So I see them starting off 3-0, and they beat Iowa State on the road to start 4-0. They have an early bye week, but then I see them beating both Kansas teams. Friday, Kansas State at home, and then the next week on October the 14th against Kansas at home as well to start 6-0. But then I see them going on a 4-game losing streak. I feel like they're going to lose to some teams that they're better than on paper. And one of those games is against West Virginia on the road. Then I see them losing to Cincinnati and Oklahoma at home. And then they lose to UCF on the road. But then they finish the season on a high note by beating Houston and BYU to finish the year at 8-4. It's possible that they could beat West Virginia, Cincinnati, and UCF to get to 11 wins, which is why I have them getting up to 11 wins. But I believe they're going to have some, losses in their schedule thrown around. I don't know if this is going to be on a 4-game losing streak like I have predicted here, but we'll see how that goes. But I have Oklahoma State finishing 8-4 this season. A pretty good step, pretty good year for the program that struggled a lot last season, and they'll be fine this year. Now we're talking about the second team that's in the race for the Big 12 conference title, and that's Texas. They're head coached by Steve Sarkisian, who's in his 3rd year at Texas. He's had some ups and downs. He's 13-12 at Texas, but last year was a big year for him. He went 8-5, had a winning season. finished 6-3 in the Big 12, although they lost the Alamo Bowl to the Washington Huskies. But they had a lot of talent last season, and they're gonna have a lot of talent this season. They had a lot of promise. They had a really tough game against Alabama last year, and they took them to the distance. I think Alabama won on a last-second field goal or late in the game, in the last minute. So they're a good team. They're gonna be around this year, and they're gonna be even better than they were last season. The Big 12 slate can literally be a cakewalk for them. They have Baylor, Kansas, Oklahoma, Houston, BYU, Kansas State, TCU, Iowa State, and Texas Tech. All of those games are extremely winnable for the Longhorns this season. They have a tough game at Alabama again. So last season they lost at home to Alabama. Now they got to go on the road to play Alabama, but I think that'll be a tough game for both teams. It's going to be really close. But other than that, their other two non-conference games against Rice and Wyoming shouldn't be a problem. And I see them getting at least to 9 wins, and it's possible that they could go undefeated if they get by Alabama. If they get by Alabama, then this team's going to be on cloud 9, because then, I'm sure they'll beat almost everyone the rest of the way. Asking for Texas to be undefeated is a long stretch, but it is possible. So I see them beating Rice, then losing to Alabama, and beating Wyoming to start the season off 2-1 before conference play begins. Then I see them having a clunker on the road against Baylor. I think that they'll lose to some of these games. They'll lose to some of these teams in conference play, but, they'll be fine. I just don't think they're going to beat every single team on their Big 12 conference schedule. Baylor's a good football team, and we'll see how they'll be this season, but I think they'll lose that one. But then I see them beating Kansas and Oklahoma. That Oklahoma game is being played in the Dallas Cowboys Stadium, but Texas should have the home field advantage in that one, so they'll be 4-2 heading into the bye week, and then they'll continue their stretch of winning with the 4-game winning streak against Houston, BYU, Kansas State, and TCU. 2 of those games are at home, which is good for them. Kansas State is not... it's always an advantage to get Kansas State at home just because of the fact that, Kansas State is a phenomenal team and they're the defending champions of the conference. But Texas, they're going to have a really good year this season, especially at home. I believe they're going to do a really good job at home this season. I feel like they're going to win a lot of these games that they probably would not win if they were on the road. And that's the case with Kansas State. They also got to play TCU on the road as well. But I feel like they'll beat that team. I believe Oklahoma and Texas, this is their, this being their swan song in the Big 12, I believe they're going to just hammer a lot of these opponents, and, they're going to win a lot of these games, and they're going to get back to contention this year, as both teams have a lot of promising talent that could develop pretty quickly. Then I see them losing to Iowa State. Again, I feel like they're going to get upset a couple times in conference play. It's not a shame to lose to Iowa State, in my opinion, because they do have a lot of solid players in that team, and they could, pull off some upsets. It's possible. So that's why I see Texas losing that game. But then they beat Texas Tech easily, or not easily, but, a pretty good game on a Friday night at home in front of their fans to finish the year 9-3 and 7-2 in the Big 12, which means that I have Texas and Oklahoma meeting each other in the Big 12 championship game, which I'll give my prediction for that at the end. But both of these teams will finish 7-2 in conference play, and they'll meet each other in the Big 12 championship. 4 teams to go. The second straight Texas school, the TCU Horned Frogs, led by Sonny Dykes, who's in his second year. Obviously, last season, we all know the story now. TCU had that magical run. They finished 13-2, 9-1 in the Big 12. They lost the Big 12 title to Kansas State, but they beat Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl semifinal, and they lost the national championship to Georgia. But that was just a phenomenal, magical Cinderella season that nobody saw coming last year. Obviously, there's a low chance that could happen again this season, but I still see TCU being above water. They lost Max Duggan, and they have a new quarterback in town, and they have some new pieces on offense and defense. But I believe that Sonny Dykes is a good enough coach to keep them underwater, and I believe that with the momentum that they got from last season, I believe that will carry over to next season. They just have a lot of tough conference games that I see them losing. They got to face Oklahoma. They got to face Texas, as well as Kansas State and Baylor. They also have an intriguing non-conference game to start the season against Colorado at home. But I think it's fine to expect them to get to 7 wins this season. They're going to get to a bowl game, and it's possible they could get to 9 wins this season if they beat some team, if they beat a couple of more teams in the Big 12 conference. So I see them starting off 5-0. They'll beat Colorado. I know that they have Deion Sanders, and that's a revitalized situation at Colorado. But I still think TCU is the better team, and I think Colorado's going to have a rough year with Deion Sanders during his first season at Colorado. So I think that TCU will win that game. And then they'll beat Nichols and Houston easily, and then they'll beat SMU pretty good, and then they'll beat West Virginia to head to 5-0. So a great start for TCU. But then I see them losing a couple games. They'll be the victims of a couple of upsets. I see them losing to Iowa State to drop to 5-1. Then I see them beating BYU at home to get to 6-1. So bowl eligibility right away. Then I see them losing to Kansas State once again on the road. That game's on the road. Kansas State's a tough place to play, so I think that they'll lose that game. So they'll drop to 6-2 before the bye week. Then I see them losing their next 2 games after the bye week to Texas Tech and Baylor. It's possible that they could beat Texas Tech because they'll have more time to prepare for that one since they have the luxury of playing in that bye week. But like I said, I think Texas Tech is a sneaky, dangerous team, and we're going to be talking about them soon. As a matter of fact, coming up next, as they have a lot of promising offenses, and they could boast one of the country's better offenses this season. So I see them losing that game. And then to Texas, I see them losing. But then they'll get to Baylor to finish to be at 7-4. Then they'll lose to Oklahoma on a Friday on a short week on the road to finish the year at 7-5. Like I said, it's possible they have winnable games at Iowa State and at Texas Tech. It's possible that they could beat Kansas State. But I'm sure they're going to lose a couple, several of those games. But, even though TCU is going to have somewhat of a drop-off from last season, or, they will have a drop-off from last season because they're not getting 13 wins again. But they will be above water, and they'll keep this winning train going, and they'll get to a bowl game again. Next, let's talk about our third straight Texas school and the last Texas school that we'll be talking about, and that's the Texas Tech Red Raiders, the head coach by Joey McGuire. And this is another coach that's in his second year at a school here in the Big 12. Last season, Texas Tech had a pretty good year. They won the Texas Bowl against Ole Miss or Mississippi, and they finished the year with an 8-5 record, and they went 5-4 in the Big 12. So they have a lot of promise against teams in the Big 12. They finished with a winning record. They have a tough non-conference game versus Oregon, and they have to face Baylor, Kansas State, and Texas. But there's no Oklahoma on the schedule, which is always a plus. And those Kansas State and Baylor games could be wins. But the Baylor games at home, and Kansas State's obviously the defending Big 12 champion. Reasonable expectations to them. They could struggle this season. They could not go bowling, but it's possible that they could go bowling. Again, Texas Tech is one of those teams that, you just don't know what you're going to get. You could get a season that is way better than anybody's expectations, but you also could get a season that falls below people's minimum expectations. So, again, they have a lot of tough games this season on their schedule. It's just going to depend on if they get some lucky bounces, if they get breaks, and if they play good enough to win. They have Tyler Shue at quarterback, and he's a phenomenal passer, but he's dealt with a tremendous amount of injuries throughout his college career. It's kind of funny because he's going to play his former team against Oregon in the second week of the season. So that's an intriguing game to look at, and that's a game that I don't think people are talking about enough as an exciting game in the second week of the college football season. But, that's an underrated game. That game, Texas Tech could win, but I see them losing that after they beat Wyoming to start the season. So 1-1, and they'll beat Tarleton, who's from the FCS. I believe they're in the WAC conference in the FCS. So they'll get to 2-1. Then I'll see them losing to West Virginia. I believe even though West Virginia could be the worst team in the conference this season, I do think that they're still good enough to squeak out some conference wins, and as a result, I'll give West Virginia a win at or versus Texas Tech. But then I see them beating Houston to get to 3-2. And then before the bye week, I see them going on a 3-game losing streak. I see them losing to Baylor on the road, then Kansas State, and then BYU. BYU is a tough place to play, like I mentioned. Baylor's pretty tough. Those are all teams that Texas Tech could beat. but those are all teams that Texas Tech could lose to, and I see them losing to all 3 of those teams. But they head into the bye week, and then after that they have the luxury of a bye week, so they have some extra time to prepare for TCU. So as a result, I believe they will win that game, to get to a 4-5. But then they'll lose to Kansas on the road. They'll beat UCF at home for a chance to get to a bowl game in the last week of the season, but it's a short week. They got to go on the road against Texas. And like I said, I just went over Texas. They're going to have a phenomenal year this year. And as a result, I see Texas Tech finishing 5-7 overall and 3-6 in the Big 12. It is possible that they could win more of those games. I look at the schedule and I say, well, the games against West Virginia is winnable. The game against Oregon could be a win. You also got to look at that BYU game as a potential win. The Baylor game's a potential win. The Kansas game as a potential win. But I see them having some struggles, throughout the season, and they're going to lose to a lot of these teams. I don't think they're good enough to, not lose to teams that they should beat. So I see them finishing 5-7 and 3-6 in the Big 12. But it is possible for Texas Tech to get into a bowl game. But like I said, when I transition over to them, I just don't know what we're going to get from this team this year, So we'll see what happens, but that's how it goes. Next, so second to last team in the conference, we got to talk about UCF, who's the 4th and final newcomer to the Big 12 conference. They're coached by Gus Malzahn, who's at his 3rd year at UCF. Last season, UCF almost made it to the American Athletic Conference title game before they lost to Tulane late in the season. They finished 9-5. They went 6-2 in the AAC, and then they lost the Military Bowl to Duke. No, as a matter of fact, they did play in the American Athletic Conference title game, I think, and then they lost to Tulane. So 6-2 in the AAC, in the American, and they lost the Military Bowl to Duke. This is their first year in the Big 12. They have a tough test early at Boise State. This should be somewhat of a rough year for the UCF Knights, but I still think it is possible for them to get to a bowl game. I see them finishing anywhere from 5 to 8 wins. And they're going to pull off some games against some Big 12 competition this year. I believe that Cincinnati and UCF are the teams that are most prepared to step into the Big 12. And obviously UCF, they can hang with anybody. They're a phenomenal program. And I could see them beating some teams in the Big 12 this season. And they're going to be in a lot of their conference games this season. So I see them starting off 3-0. They'll beat Kent State at home on a Thursday night on August 31st to start the season. Then they'll go on the road at Boise State. And I believe that even though Boise State could be favored in that game, UCF is more than capable of going into Boise and knocking off the Broncos. So I believe that they could win that game, and I think that they will win that game. So they're 2-0, and then they'll go to 3-0 against Villanova. Then they'll lose to Kansas State to drop to 3-1. Then I see them beating Baylor to get to 4-1. Then they'll lose to Kansas at 4, to get to drop to 4-2 before the bye week. Then they'll lose to Oklahoma. They'll beat West Virginia, I think. Then they'll lose to Cincinnati in a tight contest. They'll beat Oklahoma State at home, and then they'll lose to Texas Tech and Houston at home to finish the year at 6-6 and 3-6 in the Big 12. So again, if they go undefeated in non-conference play and if they beat Boise State, then UCF is primed to get to a bowl game. But if they lose that game, it's going to be really tough to get 4 wins in the Big 12. I see them getting 3 wins in the Big 12. It's possible that they could beat Kansas, but that's a road game. It's possible that they could beat Houston, but I feel like Houston will squeak out a conference win. They could beat Texas Tech. They could beat Cincinnati. So it's not like they don't have a lot of winnable games here. They do have a lot of winnable games, but of course they're going to lose some of them. And I think they'll finish 6-6. But overall, not a bad first year for UCF. With the tough non-conference game at Boise State and with their conference schedule featuring a lot of the top teams in the conference, not a bad year for Boise State. I see them finishing 6-6. And then last but not least, we're going to be talking about West Virginia, the Mountaineers, are head coached by Neil Brown. And Neil Brown's had some middling success at West Virginia. Currently, he's 22-25. At the school. He's had some ups and downs. And last season, the Mountaineers finished 5-7 and 3-6 in the Big 12. They have a lot of questions regarding their roster, especially at the quarterback position. and their offensive line as well. They have a lot of question marks as to if they're going to be better than last season. They have 2 tough games against Pitt and Penn State. Expect the losing record in the Big 12. I believe they will win several games in the Big 12 conference, but I don't think they're going to be super great this year. And I say their realistic expectations is to get from 3 to 5 wins. I could put up to 6 wins. It's possible that they could reach a bowl game. But, this conference got a lot stronger with, the 4 new teams coming in. And also, with the resurgence of Texas and Oklahoma, there's a lot of tough teams in this conference. And I don't think that West Virginia is talented enough to win a good string of these games. So to start off the season, I see them losing on the road against Penn State. Then they'll beat Duquesne easily. They'll lose to Pitt. Then they'll beat Texas Tech to get to 2-2. Then they'll lose to TCU to drop to 2-3 before the bye week. Then I see them being over 500 with wins at Houston and versus Oklahoma State. Like I said, they have a luxury of having a bye week before a weekday game, so they have extra time to prepare for Houston. And I think that they'll beat Houston easily. Or not easily, but they'll pull away by late in the game, and then I'm sure they'll upset somebody in Big 12 conference play, and that'll be Oklahoma State. But I see them going on a rough 5-game losing streak to end the season. They'll lose at UCF versus BYU, at Oklahoma versus Cincinnati, and at Baylor. I see the Mountaineers of West Virginia finishing 4-8 and 3-6 in the Big 12. I just don't think that they're gonna get to a point where it's possible where they could get to a bowl game. It is possible. I do think that they have a chance against Pitt. They have a chance against TCU and UCF, so they could get to a bowl game, but I just don't see it happening. I have way too many questions for West Virginia this season, and a lot of people have way too many questions for West Virginia this season to consider them making a bowl game. So I see them finishing 4-8 and went 3-6 in the Big 12, unfortunately, for West Virginia. So that's about it for the Big 12 conference predictions. I'm just going to go through the conference standings briefly, my projected standings, before I wrap things up here. So I see Texas and Oklahoma finishing tied for first place in the conference at a 7-2 record. Then I see Baylor and Cincinnati finishing at 6-3, tied for third place. Then I see 2 teams finishing tied for 5th place between Oklahoma State and Kansas State. Then I'll see Kansas, TCU, and BYU finishing at 4-5 each in the Big 12. Then I see Iowa State, Texas Tech, West Virginia, and UCF finishing at 3-6 respectively. So, they'll finish from 10th place to 13th place at 3-6. And then I see Houston being the worst team in this conference at 1-8. In the Big 12 and finishing last place in the Big 12 conference. And as a result, I see my Big 12 championship matchup with Texas and Oklahoma, which is a dream Big 12 conference matchup. Remember, this is the last season that both Texas and Oklahoma will be in the Big 12 because next season they're going to the SEC. And I think it'll just be right for them to end their Big 12 conference tenure by meeting each other in the Big 12 title game. Now, I have Texas beating Oklahoma in the regular season game, and then I also have them beating Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. I just think that, although Oklahoma is going to be really good this season, I just think that Texas will have a little bit more firepower on offense, and I think they'll be a little bit more dynamic, and I feel like they're a little bit more talented, which is to why I think that they'll beat Oklahoma twice this season before both of these schools jump ship to the SEC. So that's my prediction. I see Texas beating Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. And that is going to wrap it up for my Big 12 conference prediction. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you see my Big 12 conference championship game prediction being fulfilled? Do you think that someone else can make the conference title game? What do you think about my predictions about the 4 new teams in the Big 12 this season? Let me know about everything that you have on your mind about this video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you're enjoying my conference previews for the season. The next conference preview will be on the SEC. I'm currently working on that now, and that should be up pretty soon. So expect that video to drop pretty soon, within these next few days. I'll probably say within the next 2 to 3 days that video should drop, and then I'll do the Pac-12, and that will wrap it up for the Power 5 conferences. I hope you enjoyed this Big 12 conference prediction video. Like, share, comment, and subscribe on the video if possible. And let's keep this this momentum going here on the Air Raid Saturdays College Football YouTube channel. Like I said in previous videos, I have a lot of big plans for this. I just want to make sure that I get these predictions out of the way first before I get to my bigger plans for the channel. So I hope you enjoyed. Be on the lookout, and I'll see you on the flip side. Once again, I'm Justin Perez for the Air Raid Saturdays College Football YouTube channel, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And like always, subscribe, comment, share, and like the video, and I'll see you next time.